Wow, let's try this again. So I just started a stream a minute ago. It was pretty messed up. So let's see what happens now. So welcome back to the channel. Welcome if you are new. My name's Cougar. We talk about global heating. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about weather, just because there's some gnarly, nasty, very suspicious weather going on right now. I don't usually talk about weather because I talk about global heating. But, of course, most people are going to interact with global heating through weather. So we'll just allow for that. And once in a while, we'll need to look at the weather and see what it's sort of doing to us and what that can tell us about our situation vis-a-vis global heating and the Earth dynamic system in general. So what do I want to deal with here? Let's see. There we go. So a couple of events happening in the world right now. This is a view of Europe. Why won't it scroll? Anyway, it's fine. So this is CNN. You can see that first paragraph, 17 people have been killed in some of the worst floods to hit Central Europe in decades as Storm Boris sweeps through the region, dumping well over a month's worth of rain. So they're naming their storms in Europe and the UK. They started doing this a few years back. We don't really do that. We have named a couple of storms here in the US, but it turns out not to be very popular. Americans don't want to know anything about storms. It's all weather to them, and so they would rather just push that out of their mind. But in Europe and the UK, they've decided, the meteorologists have decided that weather, because of climate change and global heating, weather is going to become a cultural phenomenon. So as with hurricanes, they're going to, and other related phenomena like typhoons and cyclones, they're going to start naming their really bad weather so that culturally they can remember it and talk about it. So this one is Storm Boris, and it swept through Central Europe and dumped basically a bazillion, quadrillion inches of rain, whatever it was. They are underwater. They are doing high water rescues, and these are, what I like about this picture is these are old towns and cities in Europe. And, you can't imagine that they've seen very many catastrophic floods because the buildings are all 200, 300, 600 years old, right? Some of this stuff is medieval. So when they get a catastrophic flood and it comes through there, and then they say something like, oh, we haven't seen this since 1996. It's like, is that true? Look at these old buildings, and some of these buildings are being washed away and to be destroyed. And it really, you haven't seen this in 20 years, 30 years? What are you talking about? So there's a certain capacity to sort of downplay these things. And I kind of get it, but we really have to wake up to the fact that the weather seems to be trying to kill us, and largely succeeded, because here this round of flooding caught 17 people and killed them. And I was actually listening to a video associated with this, maybe even been this one, where they said that 2 elderly gentlemen died in their home. They drowned in their home. So how often does that happen in Europe? Okay, how often does that even happen in America? And speaking of America, going back to CNN, there is now this is supposed to be showing up. What is wrong with my setup here? Well, anyway, there's a similar event happening in North Carolina, And I'll just read the headline. Once in 1,000 year rainfall event from an unnamed storm floods homes and forces rescues in North Carolina. It's the same story. Cars floating away, people drowning, homes, filling up to the ceiling with water and all this stuff in North Carolina from what, and they even put this in the title, an unnamed storm. So this wasn't a hurricane. We didn't see this coming. The first time I heard about this was, I think this morning, I heard in my newsfeed, one of the weather people I like to listen to. He was saying, oh yeah, there's an instability churning off the Carolinas, and this one could hit North Carolina, and there's going to be excessive rain. And but it wasn't like it was a hurricane or something. It was just a storm. In Europe, they named their storms. This one, it didn't even get a name. It was not a hurricane. It was literally just a low pressure center swirling off of South Carolina, and it was going to come ashore, as they say with hurricanes, in North Carolina. And now this. And they're calling it a once in 1,000 year event. So we have to be a little bit aware that this is going to be something that they start to do in the future. Is they're going to start see, I don't know why that didn't change when I asked it to. Anyway, so this is the other one. They're going to start putting things like once in 1,000 years, once in 100 years. And, this storm in Central Europe, they're saying, oh, we haven't seen rain like this in 30 years or 40 years or whatever they're going to say about it. I think I actually saw one commentator that said it was a once in a 100 year event. What they're trying to say is that with regards to this North Carolina storm, in 1,000 years, you would expect to see one of these. In 1,000 years, which is a long time, okay? Again, these numbers are so big, they could become incomprehensible, but you have to stop and think about them. You have to stop and think about what's being stated here, right? Big numbers. Once in 1,000 year rainfall event from unnamed storm. This is an unnamed storm. This wasn't even on the cultural radar for the meteorologists. They didn't give it a name. They were just saying, well, it's going to come ashore and it could bring some rain. They weren't expecting this. They just weren't. When I was watching it this morning, they were saying, yeah, this could bring some heavy rains, and but no one was saying sandbag your houses and move to higher ground. No one was saying that. But look what's happening in North Carolina. And they're saying, oh, wow, of course we didn't prepare for this. Of course we didn't board up our windows. Of course we didn't sandbag our garage doors. This is a once in a 1,000 year event. Why would we expect this kind of rain? Only once in 1,000 years do you get rain like this. Well, how could we possibly anticipate this? So what's going on here? You have to, when you see headlines like this, I don't want you to just walk away from it and say, well, that's interesting. Once in 1,000 years. What does that even mean? Okay, an unnamed storm. So it's not one of our hurricanes. It's not, what's the current hurricane? Beryl? No, that was 2 months ago when we had Beryl. So this is something else. This is some unnamed storm. They didn't have a name. It wasn't doing anything. No one thought it was going to be a thing. And it came ashore and it tried to kill everybody in North Carolina in this once in 1,000 year event. So there's a couple things going on here. The first thing I want to say is the meteorologists are completely, how best to say this? The meteorologists are not prepared for what the planet is going to bring them. They think that their 100 years of experience with weather has prepared them for what global heating is going to bring. And it's not true. It isn't true. And the second thing I want to say is, neither are their meteorological models. Their models are not, these days they are becoming increasingly predictive. But most of the modeling has been statistical. So when you see this kind of a thing, and the winds are blowing from this direction, and the altitudes are having this kind of temperature, then it's likely to rain over there. Okay, they have a statistical model, and it's sort of the same thing that, some old grandpa would have. He said, well, usually it doesn't cloud up like this early in the day, but when it clouds up like this early in the day, and the clouds are kind of green, and my elbow kind of hurts a little bit, then that means it's tornado weather. Okay, and that's a statistical analysis. Someone who's been alive a long time could say, well, every time my elbow hurts like this and the sky is that color green, well, then we're going to have a tornado. And he's just saying that's what it's done every time in the past. And the models, the numerical models, the actual, computer models that they use now, less the statistical, my elbow hurts type of thing, and more of the, well, let's run this through a computer and have the computer project into the future what should happen. And even the computer models are a bit out of their league with this stuff, because they were trained on, 100 years of weather data, more likely 50, but 50 years of weather data. And, most of that is prior to this huge influx of global heating impacts. Global heating is changing a lot of stuff. So, the Gulf of Mexico has never been hotter, and the AMOC is slowing down and preparing to stop, and so on. The Great Lakes have never been warmer, and so on. So people who kind of remember how it used to be, they're out of their element now. And you got a computer model that's been trained on data from 50 years ago, 40 years ago, before global heating really set in and started making changes to the Earth system. All that training is now kind of useless. Not completely, but sort of, kinda. It's going to give you skewed results. So these guys, they run their models. They have the old guy in the back of the room who says, yeah, my elbow is not really hurting today. And, and they just kind of come up with a weather forecast, and they get up in front of the TV cameras, and they give their weather report, right? Their 5-minute segment. And everybody goes to work the next day thinking they know what's going on, because the weatherman last night said something about the weather. And, then they're out here in this, and they're out here, 6 hours into their day, and this bullshit's going down, right? Who ordered this? This wasn't on the menu. Where'd this come from? And what you have to start watching for is that our understanding of how the world has worked is sort of not going to cut it. We don't really have a yardstick or a set of patterns that we can go back to and say, well, when it does this, it kind of means that, because the Earth dynamic system is changing. It just is. And so everything you thought you knew about the weather that was supposed to be eternal and sacred and predictable and seasonal and all these kind of things no longer applies. And this idea that it no longer applies is going to become more and more profound and more obvious with time. And now people, especially here in America, people who are anti-science, and there's a lot of anti-science, anti-intellectual people in the American public. I'm not sure where that comes from. Maybe we can thank the tobacco companies for that. But there's a lot of anti-science and anti-intellectual sentiment in America. So when scientists come along and say, well, this is our best guess of what's going on, and they don't want to hear it. And even the weather people don't believe in global heating. Why don't they? They're all about weather. They should be all over this. And yet this is what happens. The weather people are going to become increasingly irrelevant. The weather people, not the climate people. Although the climate people are going to be kind of snowed under too with the changes that are going to happen. But the weather people, the guy that gets up at 6 o'clock at night and gives his 5-minute segment so you can go to work tomorrow, kind of have a feel for what's going to happen tomorrow in the weather. That guy, he's just going to become increasingly irrelevant. Most of the time it'll still work, but some of the times it won't. And it'll be, and the times when it won't be little hiccups like, oop, well, it rained a little more than we thought. Oops, it wasn't supposed to rain in the afternoon, but it did. Okay, it's going to be this kind of shit. This was a 1 in 1,000 year rainfall event. This is pretty catastrophic. This is a rainfall event in North Carolina that you wouldn't expect to see except once every 1,000 years. They missed it. They completely missed it. I didn't say anything about this. This should have been all over. This should have been all over the headlines. Catastrophic weather, emergencies, FEMA organizing. The first responders out in the streets, door to door, getting people to evacuate. There was nothing like that. It just came out of nowhere. It's just a little tiny, unthreatening weather system off of the Carolinas, and it just came ashore, and this is what happened. The same thing in Central Europe. They'll say, well, we haven't had rain like this in a long time. You probably haven't had rain like this in 400 years, actually, if you want to really come down to it. And this has been happening increasingly in parts of Europe. There was a big flood, and I probably should look up the name of the village that got hit so bad, but the water was it was a village in a kind of a narrow gorge, so you kind of sensed the vulnerability. There was a river in the bottom, and it was all very old, very medieval. It was a river in the bottom, and the river was 20 feet across and channelized with concrete, and there was little bridges over it. It was all very bucolic, and there's all these old houses, all these half-timbered houses and old places from the Renaissance, old brick and old Tudor and all these old construction practices. And there was water 20 feet up on the sides of these houses after this flood that came down through there. And you could see the water line. You could see where the water had gone up, and there was still, bark and branches and leaves and trees and things stuck on the side of the building. And they were just wiped out. They were just completely destroyed. And how long had that village been there with that little river running through it? That little tiny little river looked like nothing. Probably in other times of the year, you could walk across it. Wouldn't even need a bridge. Just walk across it, right? Ankle deep. And then there was suddenly in this little valley, this more like a canyon, the water was 20 feet up on the sides of the buildings, past the second floor. And they were just destroyed. And that village had been there for, I don't know, 300, 400, 500, 600 years. You could tell from the construction that it had been there since forever. And when my wife and I were watching that particular weather segment, I said, "You see that? You see those old houses? They're destroyed now, but they've been there for 500 years." And they're gonna say, "Oh yeah, we get rain all the time like this." And my response is, "No, you don't. You're pretending you do, but you don't. Otherwise, those houses wouldn't be 500 years old." Now, you can only have that kind of an observation in Europe and the UK, because they're really old parts of Western civilization. And there's old bridges, and there's old roads, and there's old houses, and there's old barns, and there's old castles, right? There's old villages, and they have some age, and they're not ready. They're not ready for global heating, and a lot of those places just won't survive. They're in the wrong place. No, they weren't in the wrong place 400 years ago. They were in the perfect place. And if that river had flooded in that valley and destroyed all the homes, people would have left. They wouldn't have come back. But it didn't. And it was a nice place to live. And they thought they were safe. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, because of global heating, changes in the Earth dynamic system, they got whacked. And now they're done. And that's what's happening right now in Europe. These storms that are coming into the UK and Europe, Central Europe, Eastern Europe. These storms are phenomenal, just off the charts. They're terrible. And these are old places, and these are old pieces of civilization. People have been here for thousands of years in some of these places. And, the buildings aren't that old, but the fact that humans have been settled here, they've been settled here for 800 years, 1,000 years, 1,500 years. Some of these towns were established by the Romans when they occupied Europe. What's happening? What's happening? Why is it that these places that, don't have any expectation of this kind of flooding. Now they're flooding. It's happening all the time. And how is it that North Carolina people go to work in the morning and they think there's not going to be a big deal, and by 1 o'clock in the afternoon there's a 1,000-year rainfall event taking place? Something only happens once in 1,000 years. Why were these people going to work? Why were the kids going to school? Why weren't they in their homes? Why weren't they in a shelter somewhere? Because this storm was a nothing burger. They thought it was nothing. Oh, maybe it'll rain. Maybe it won't. Have a nice day. And then this happens. We're not ready for this. We're not ready. Okay, you have to understand the tools we have that represent our readiness, that inform us, that get us out of the way of harm, that tell us what tomorrow's weather is going to be and the day after that inform leadership and tell them when they have to, make the phone calls and call the emergencies and evacuate and all those things that we use to save ourselves from weather break down. Because now we no longer understand what's going to happen with the weather. And people will say, well, the weather man, it's more like the weather or not man, right? Is he going to get it right? Well, they don't always get it completely, absolutely perfect, but it's generally pretty good. Except for this. But this is not their fault. This is global heating. We don't recognize the planet anymore. This planet is unrecognizable. We don't know what to do. We don't know how to position ourselves. We're like babes in the woods at this point. With all of our experiences of weather and all of our computational throw and all of our experience and all of our FEMA and all of our, emergency broadcast networks and all these other things, we're completely lost. We have all these tools, but we can't apply them because we're completely these things just happen. How did we miss this one? Why was anyone at work? Why was anyone at school? Why weren't they all hunkering down and waiting for the onslaught? They didn't know. Nobody knew. The weather people didn't know. And then this happens. And it's the same thing in Europe. They're not ready for this. They're not ready for this. They don't know what to do. These are old buildings. They've got basements. Their basements are full. And the first floor is full. On most of these buildings, the first floor is flooded. They can be completely destroyed. Some of these buildings will be so damaged by floodwaters and the resulting structural damage to the building that a lot of these buildings, which are 100, 200 years old, will have to be torn down. Torn down, replaced with something else. Because of this. Because this has never happened before. And they weren't ready for it. They didn't know it was coming. And it came out of nowhere. So, for the title of this video, I called it Demonic Weather. It's tongue-in-cheek, right? I'm kind of poking fun a little bit. But I was thinking, just the other day, just yesterday, in fact, I was thinking, one of the things we might see come out of all this global heating and all these changes in the Earth dynamic system, we might see a return to coping mechanisms that people used to have because it's all they had was coping mechanisms. When the lightning struck and set fire to the church or the barn or the whatever, what was that? Well, that was Zeus was angry, or demonic influences, or witchcraft. They would actually, if lightning hit the church and set it on fire, they would drag old women out of their homes and set them on, burn them alive for witchcraft. That's how people coped. And if at some point we might return back to those practices of just coping, finding someone to blame. They used to blame bad weather like this. Okay, or this bullshit in North Carolina, a 1,000-year event that shouldn't happen more than 1,001 in 1,000 years. And, they would drag old women out of their huts and hang them up from a tree for dabbling in witchcraft, because why else would this happen? Why else? Why would this happen except for witchcraft? Why would this town be flooded except that someone, made a witch angry? And you think I'm joking, but I'm not. I'm not joking. That's what people used to do. They used to blame it on somebody. Drag them out of their house, beat them up, stone them, hang them from an oak tree, and figure, well, They won't do that again, except, of course, eventually it happens again, and they have to go find another person to drag out of their house and hang from a tree and stone. That's how people coped. Because they didn't understand. They had no way to prepare. This came out of the blue. And right now we have all this technology and the weatherman and the charts and the figures and the rain radar and everything else. But what's going to happen when this continues? And maybe we'll have to reinvent, gods of lightning, gods of floods. And why would it flood like this unless the gods of the weather were angry? And how are we going to appease the gods of weather? Poseidon and the flooding from the sea, and who is it that Meteora brings down all the rain? And we have to have sacrifices and altars and temples, and we have to appease the gods. And what are people going to do? How are they going to cope with this? And they'll go along for a while, right? They'll go along and they'll say, well, we'll just rebuild and we'll pump out our basement and we'll replaster the walls. But after like 3 times in 3 years, what are they going to do then? Well, eventually, even educated people who, quote, know better, unquote, will revert to form. They'll revert to what people have always done. They'll find someone to blame. Because none of this makes any sense. None of this makes any sense to people. It doesn't even make sense to the weather people. And it probably doesn't even make sense to the scientists. It makes sense to me. It's all global heating. It's global heating. Because where did this rainfall come from? This rainfall came from the sky. And how did the moisture get into the sky before it could come down as rain? It evaporated from the water, the hot water caused by global heating off the eastern seaboard. And their weather models and their weather reports just can't accommodate the fact that now everything is really hot. And this winter, they'll have terrible, terrible snow events. Terrible snow events in the Northeast, upstate New York. It'll be like it was like last year or the year before. Well, I can't remember when it was. 50 feet of snow fell in Buffalo or someplace in upstate New York. 50 feet of snow fell. Okay, well, wow, where's my global heating? I could sure use some of that right now. Well, that is caused by global heating. It is. 50 feet of snow, that's absolutely 100% global heating. Because what's rainfall now in the colder parts of the season will be snowfall. And this rainfall in North Carolina came from the sea, which is really hot right now. And the snowfall that's going to come in upstate New York is going to come from the Great Lakes, which are really hot right now. And the other thing that happens in the Great Lakes is they don't freeze over. When the Great Lakes freeze over, then the water is under an ice sheet. And it can't evaporate into the atmosphere. So it can't be transported and fall as snow someplace else. Remember, you learned this in the 3rd grade, right? Evaporation, transportation, precipitation. And snow is precipitation. And so you have snow when you have atmospheric moisture. And where do you get the atmospheric moisture? From the lakes and the rivers and the oceans. That's where it comes from. And when the Great Lakes are really hot, then that ice layer doesn't form, or it forms later in the year. And plus, when it's hot, there's a lot of evaporation. So as soon as some cold weather comes down from the north, which is also global heating, by the way, that weather isn't supposed to be, those cold fronts aren't supposed to be coming down. They're supposed to be locked into the Arctic by the polar vortex. But the polar vortex is all fucked up, caused by global heating. The polar vortex is part of the Earth dynamic system, and it's fucked up because of global heating. And so when the polar vortex breaks apart and it sends down a huge cold air mass and it passes over the Great Lakes and they're anomalously hot because of global heating, and it picks up that moisture and it drops it all in upstate New York, and you get 50 feet of snow and people die. And they're like, where's my global heating now? Just when I need it. That's all global heating. That's what all that is. It's all global heating. Your weather just tried to kill you. And of course, in some places, like we're seeing in, I don't know what the death toll is in North Carolina. Do we have a death toll? I don't know if there's a death toll in North Carolina right now. It's maybe it's too soon to have a death toll, right? But it's not too soon to have a death toll with Storm Boris. They've got 17 dead. Suggests that they weren't ready. 17 people dead. 2 of them dead in their own home. Drowned inside their own home. Not ready. didn't expect this. No one told them. No one came to the door and said, knock, 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 you got to run. You got to get out of here. Come with us. We'll put you in the truck. We'll take you to higher ground. They weren't ready. They didn't know what to do. It just came and it took them and drowned them, killed them in their home. Killed them in their home. They weren't outside their home trying to run away. They were in their home thinking they were safe, and it killed them in their home. What's that sound like to you? That sounds like they weren't ready. Nobody's ready for global heating. You're not ready for this. You're not ready for this. And I promise you, your whether or not man is not ready either. Really, even your climate scientists are not ready. And your FEMA isn't ready, and your governor isn't ready, and your president isn't ready, and the Congress isn't ready. And no one's ready for this. Your local fire department, your ambulances, your police, your local governments, they're not ready for this. Everyone thinks that the last 50 years of weather is somehow going to be the next 50 years of weather. And nothing could be more incorrect. No expectation could be more flawed than that the last 50 years will be a repeat in the next 50 years. That is absolutely categorically wrong. Simply wrong. So, what can we expect? We can expect demonic weather. And eventually, people will treat it as such. They'll say, well, this is God's wrath. This is witchcraft. We got to drag somebody out of their house and string them up in an oak tree. Who is it this time? Who do we think is doing the witchcraft? Who's the oldest woman with a wart on her nose? Who's, no one likes, and, she's mean to the neighbors, and childless cat lady, or whatever they're calling them these days. And they'll drag her out of her house and string her up in an oak tree. That so-and-so, she won't do that again. Well, but the weather's going to do it again. You're going to have another 1 in 1,000 year flood. Except, of course, it's not 1 in 1,000 years. It's 1 every 3 years because you don't understand what's happening to you. Your 1 in 1,000 year floods are going to happen every other year. Every few years. Because that's just your expectation. And your expectations are flawed. They're wrong. The Earth dynamic system has changed already. It's already changed. That's why there's 17 people dead in Central Europe. That's why these 400-year-old towns are now flooded up to the second floor. For the first time ever. People just have no idea what's happening to them. So, that's all I want to say about that. Like I said, this is current events. We had this going on in Europe at the very same time. This is basically the same page on CNN at 9/16, September 16th. And right over here in the good old US of A, we're having our own little shit show. Oh, well, and if you want to look back a couple of weeks, they're having similar problems in Bangladesh, and they're having similar problems. Where was the last big flood? What was just before that? We had a big ass flood. I can't remember now where it was. And of course, there's massive, out of control, catastrophic. I could probably go back to CNN and find it. Wildfires in Portugal, and they're actually calling for aid. Portugal is trying to get, let's see, where would it be? It would be CNN's ad banners messing with me. Portugal is trying to, I'm not seeing it. Anyway, it was in the news feed this morning. Portugal is on fire. I'm looking at the world. Maybe I should look at Europe. So you can take my word for it if you want. But they're calling them out of controlled wildfires in Portugal. And Portugal is neighbor to Spain, so it's part of Europe. Yeah, it's not showing up. But, our local news doesn't really carry world events like this sort of thing. I just kind of see we're all hung up with elections and JD Vance, and it's like, guys, get your head out of your ass. The world's trying to kill you. And is being somewhat successful, even as it's not even trying very hard. She's not even on the front page. Portugal is on fire, and they're requesting aid from the rest of Europe. It's not even on the page. It's nuts. I'd have to do a Google search, wouldn't I? Right? Let's just do that. Portugal fires. Severe fire, Portugal. Portugal, thousands of firefighters battle raging wildfires. Portugal asks EU for assistance as wildfire reaches residential area. They're on fucking fire, people. Portugal is on fucking fire. Thousands of firefighters battle raging wildfires in Portugal. Drone footage shows sky blackened as deadly wildfires ravage western Portugal. Look at this shit. Would you just look at this, please? This is a drone. This is a drone video. That's not a storm. That's not a storm crossing the horizon bringing rain. That's fire. That's fire. That's smoke. Would you look at this landscape? This is Portugal. At the same time that Central Europe is seeing storms like they've probably never seen in their history of Europe. Now, Portugal is on fire so bad that they're having to request assistance from the EU. This is what's happening in your world, people. And you didn't even hear about this in America. America won't talk about Portugal. They barely talk about Central Europe. And it's like, this is what's happening. It's really hard to even keep up. But all of this is the same thing. It's all global heating. It's what happens when the planet is out to kill you. The planet is trying to kill us. Is it demonic? 2 dead in wildfires. Ah, man, that's a tough way to die. That is a hard way to die in a fire. Man, you don't want that. Paradise Fire, so-called campfire, Paradise Fire, killed 89 people, most of them in their cars, trying to outrun it. Died in their cars. Oh, please. That's global heating. And you say, well, we have fires all the time. Not like that, you don't. No, you don't. Not like that, you don't. Thousands of firefighters battle raging wildfires in Portugal. 2 people dead. Entire villages evacuated. Europe sends in planes to water bomb the infernos. Now, that all sounds very dramatic, doesn't it? Listen, man, this is their reality. That's a cornfield. This is their reality. That's a building. They are on fucking fire. Standing around and watching it burn. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What can you do? Portugal is on fire. It's a big deal. They're freaking out. Portugal is freaking out. How old of a nation is Portugal, right? Thousands of years, right? They're freaking out. And this isn't the first year they burned. Portugal has burned many times, as has Spain. They are going up in flames, let me tell you. This whole part of Europe is going up in flames. As another part of it, 1,000 miles to the east, is underwater to the first floor. And meanwhile, over here in the U.S., we've got fires on the West Coast, and they've got an unnamed storm coming ashore in North Carolina. This business. And if you think there isn't a pattern here, well, get used to it. There is definitely a pattern. This is absolutely what is happening to us. This is it. This is what's happening to us. And you can always say, well, it's always burning somewhere. Enough that one nation is calling other nations for aid? Seriously? And it always rains in North Carolina. A once in 1,000 year rainfall event that just about destroys the place? came out of nowhere? People went to work in the morning and they came home in this? I don't think so. I don't think so. And people are not going to take this well. People are going to freak the fuck out at some point. They're going to freak out. They really are. Because that's what people do. Eventually, they freak out. It's what they don't understand. It's what they don't understand. They don't know how to cope. Well, they're going to have to cope. And I wouldn't be too surprised, like I said, if they don't abreact and just go completely off the rails. We'll see. We'll see what people do. We'll see if they keep their shit together. Or we'll see if they start stringing up old women in oak trees for witchcraft. Because that's what they used to do. Pretty regular, as a matter of fact. Pretty regular. And watch out. Watch out, people. We'll see. We'll see if we keep our shit together. We'll see, won't we? We'll just see. We'll see. We'll see. I'm not optimistic. That's all I got. Don't forget to like. Don't forget to subscribe. I come back here once in a while and terrify people. I am a terrorist or something. Anyway, have a good night. Have a good day. Have a good week. Have a good life. And keep an eye on the weather. She's a-comin'.